Hi, I'm Noam Wasserman, Dean of the SciSim School of Business at Yeshiva University. I was a longtime professor at Harvard Business School, an entrepreneur, and a venture capitalist. I wrote the bestseller, The Founder's Dilemmas.
And I'm Charlie Harary. I've been working with companies for over 10 years. And that book, Founder's Dilemmas, and the challenges faced by the 10,000 founders in it is the basis of this podcast. We are delving into the issues faced by startups to help you avoid the pitfalls that claim so many good companies.
Let's get started.
Okay, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Charlie Harary, sitting here with Dean Wasserman, talking about business, going really behind the scenes to understand some of the deep reasons for success and failures in many of the businesses and entrepreneurs and startups. Last episode, we spoke about the concept of some of the perils of creating founding teams and relationships that I think, on surface would be good ideas. People that you know for a long time. But as Dean has spoken with through the data, it's really not at all. It's a total flip in how we would see the world. One of the concepts we spoke about last week was this idea of homophily, which is that, people like people that are like them. And that could be good if you are, at a dinner party or at a wedding or in the back of a synagogue or, at a baseball game. But when it comes to a business, it actually can be a bias that gets in your way of success. And where we left off yesterday, and for those who have the chance to go back to the previous episode, please do. Dean, you stated a line that I wrote down, and that I think needs to be, as they say, tweetable. Social knowledge is negative, right? Social knowledge the social knowledge that people have really is a negative plane. It's not like a good thing that you know somebody casually. It's actually a potential hazard. So in the ideal, according to the data, you really should be you should be looking at each person clean, using no bias towards people that you know in figuring out your founders. But if you do have someone that you do know and you still want to start a company, you need to really go in with your eyes wide open. That's really where we left it. And the two areas that I really want to discuss today is how do you do it? Friends, family, acquaintances, and sort of B, if we have the time, how do you go the other way? How do you protect yourself from people that you don't even know, right? And you're about to give someone equity in a business that you're going to care very much about. So it's a very you're really what's the proper process of dating, if you will, for the stranger. So let's jump in right away, and thank you again for doing this. Let's talk about people that know each other. Okay, what should they be doing to make sure that their business goes smoothly?
Okay, so first of them is to acknowledge that you are taking lots of risks. We tend to think that this is going to be risk-free doing it with the people that I know and trust so well. As we talked about last time, that is very hazardous as a bold assumption that is going to often be burst and cause even more of a disappointment when that happens. And two of the biggest risks that you are taking is our natural inability to talk about the difficult issues, the elephants in the room with the people closest to us. And the second one is that if something goes awry within the startup, that the damage it's going to cause to your personal relationship. And we were calling that playing with fire. And the big gap between the two of those, the low chance of discussing the elephants and the high damage that you're going to have when you engage in this and then have a kind of a blow up like what you talked about with your wife and the issues that she foresaw were going to be causing problems for it. How to be able to do that. When you're playing with fire, building firewalls is the key thing that you have to proactively do.
Good. That's very good.
And so, for instance, let's take the second of the things here when there's a lot of damage and the way in which you can reduce that. Let's talk about one of my case studies that I did on this. There's a woman named Harary who had founded a company. It was called ProLab, a Texas company. And she brought into the company both her mother and her husband.
Okay.
And so this is in some ways playing with fire in the extreme.
Right. Squared.
Exactly. Like if you think about if there's major damage to our personal relationship, if you do the founding with an acquaintance and things go awry, how many other acquaintances could you find to go and replace that person? Like 8 billion?
Right.
Like, there's plenty that you can go and do that. You go and bring mom into the business and things go awry.
Right.
How many others can you go and replace mom with?
Right.
Zero. Like, this is the most important of all relationships you're going to have in life. And so it heightens even more so, like, the criticality of being able to make sure that you are acknowledging and then dealing with those issues. And the way that Hillary approached it enables us to see is both the dangers and also the ways that you can do it. In the end, she actually had all sorts of problems that she had with her husband because she bypassed being able to acknowledge that she was playing with fire with him. They did not have any good, strong, difficult conversation muscles. They could not discuss all of the issues that we were going to be facing within the venture when we are disagreeing. How are we going to be able to resolve those types of issues? His kind of a role, he had a different picture of it than she did, but they weren't willing to discuss those divergences. A lot of things that all lined up in the negative direction. Fortunately, with mom, she was able to be a lot more able to have those difficult conversations because, among other things, she had gone through a professionalization process with mom already. She had been all sorts of ways that before the startup even began that she was interacting with her on a professional basis. And so all sorts of things that she could actually give her a performance review. Think about the most pointed of the things that you're going to be doing with a family member within the business. Telling them that where they're not doing well. Mom, this is how you're not as good a mom as you could have been.
Right.
That's not any kind of
work.
Conversation that you're going to be able to do very well. But she had gone through already the professionalization and the difficult conversation muscle building that she had done with mom. She had not done that with her husband.
Can I ask a question on this? When you say difficult conversation muscle building, do you mean that from a personal perspective, like mom and daughter know how to actually have a conversation that was once about you didn't come for the holidays and is now about you didn't call the 5 people that you should on your sales list? Or what you're saying that building muscles of difficult conversation in the personal world is actually distinct from building them in the professional world?
Yeah, the second of those. That you have to do it within each of these realms.
Separately. So your muscle could be strong personally and weak professionally.
Yes, absolutely. And this is where you're going to be fooling yourself into thinking that we are also strong professionally because we have this strong on the personal. And that's where it's going to get you into trouble because these very different compartments of life have different ground rules, have different ways that we have to be approaching the difficult conversations within them. It's going to be different types of conversations to begin with, let alone how we've been able to build those ground rules.
I want to just bring up, and it's interesting you say that because one of the companies that I was involved in, or I'm still involved in, the founder, the CEO, is friends with a lot of his direct reports. And even to this moment, it shocks me and him to how difficult the professional tough conversations are to the same people that he can have difficult conversations with personally. That's an amazing, or, as one person said to me, and I know it's going to sound a little ridiculous, but it's really not. On the ball field, he can tell the guy what he's doing wrong, and they're cool. That same guy goes into the boardroom, and it doesn't work. And that's a huge bias, and I think it's a big miss that people don't get, and I think it's important that we just pause on it for a second, which is just because you can have a tough conversation in an area of your life with somebody, it doesn't necessarily mean that now you guys have an open border, and that just applies everywhere. It's a different world. So you may be ill-equipped in the professional world, even if you can talk about anything and you have no filters with somebody personally. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And even more complicating that is the fact that you could have 2 different people who you are your coworkers and you're close with, but where you're going to have different challenges being able to have these difficult conversations with them. There's a very big difference between we were friends and now we're working together versus we were coworkers and we became close. And the directionality is going to be a critical part of being able to see where do the minefields, where the problems lay, and are we going to be able to handle them well. One of my students at Harvard Business School, Jessica Alter, she started a company called Founder Dating, and it's going to get into the second of the pieces. We should first make sure to wrap a ribbon around the playing with fire part of it. But she wrote a piece that I thought captured all of this really well, and it talked about founders have to learn how to fight well. That one of the critical skills that you have to be able to get through is being able to, A, not avoid the difficult conversations, but B, being able to make a productive fight out of it.
Interesting. Yeah, I wonder, I know there's research done by John Gottesman. Did I get that? John Gottman? I don't remember.
Yeah.
About couples, where he was able to predict the couple's ability to stay together for any length of time by watching them fight. if I'm getting that correct. I just wonder if that's a really good use of one's thinking with regards to founders, right? You could pretty much tell early on if the person that you're founding a company with or that you're doing a project with is going to last based on your ability to fight. It's a very astute point that I don't think people are thinking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so let's get back into Hillary's story and the things that we can learn from the framework and from the things that she went and did. And so one of the things, for instance, when she was bringing her mother into the business, she used a structural approach to being able to limit the damage. So she assigned her to be in a different part of the company, reporting to someone else, not reporting to the CEO. So that other person is going to have to do the performance review. That other person is going to have to do the day-to-day coaching and things like that without it having the damage that it might be if it's the mother and daughter having to interact in those realms. And so that's one of the ways in which you can build a firewall that's a structural firewall to being able to do that. There's a great real estate entrepreneur, a guy named David Nagel out in Los Angeles, who he was talking to our masters in real estate students. We have a program that we introduced a year ago, the Mitzner Master Degree in Real Estate. And he was talking about how he brought two of his nephews into the business. This is right here, playing with fire writ large. You know, the two of them, their interactions, all the rest of the repercussions going to have on multiple parts of the family tree. David, in a very thoughtful way, was able to take the Hillary lessons and being able to apply it there. He said one of them, their strengths, one of their strengths is on the internal side. The other one is more on the external. Let me assign them to different parts of the company. Let me not have them be interacting within the same unit and being able to have all sorts of ways in which the day-to-day is going to be harmful because of the issues there. Let's make sure that any flare-up is going to be localized if there's going to be any flare-up there. And so in a lot of ways, this structural approach that Hillary was taking of making sure any family member that she brings into the company is not going to be directly reporting to another family member. That's one of the ways that you can limit it. She also created a disaster plan that if we are going and fighting with each other, then this is the one of us who has to back away from the company. Think down the road, and this is also where inherently we tend to think about the glorious, the great scenario. We have to force ourselves to think about the pitfalls.
Yeah.
We have to think about not if this is going to happen, but almost tell yourself when it happens that we're going to hit a bump in the road. Now, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
And if you leave it for when suddenly everything has gone awry, it's going to be much worse. If you go and think down the road and already plan and have even in writing about if we're not at loggerheads with each other, then, honey, you're going to be the one to back away from the company. This is my startup, and this is I'm going to be able to continue in it. That's where you're building a lot of the disaster plans that will help limit the damage. Even went and Hillary created a prenup. The equivalent of a founder prenup, being able to have ways in which the protection that you have, being able to skate. If we think about our personal lives and how few of us, when I take a show of hands in class, how many of you are married? How many of you have prenups? Just about none in the air.
Right.
It's because at that point, just like with founders, but when we're going and founding a family, we only think about the glorious when we come together and we get to our 50th anniversary.
Right.
Thinking about the pitfalls and planning around them is one of the key lessons about when you're playing with fire, make sure you don't get burned by being able to build some of those firewalls for yourself.
Yeah, and I would even think that even if you don't hit a disaster, you're going to have issues. Like if you do really well and now you've got the opportunity for VC capital or you have the opportunity to exit, or you have to make a pivot to take advantage of a market versus to diversify the product offering. Like, even if you're killing it, you may be in a really difficult scenario with your founders. You know, to give you an example, so there's a real estate project that I am involved in, and the person who was leading it was very smartly on this point that you're bringing up, which he saw there were multiple people in the room, and he said, I know that each of you have an interest in real estate. In this scenario, I know what's going to happen. We're going to build the building. We're going to get to the end. And at the end, we're going to do the fun stuff. The finishes, the touches, the lobbies. And that stuff costs money when you build a building but large enough. And everyone's going to have an opinion, and we're going to be ground to a halt. And then it's going to slow us down. And when you can multiply, materials and time and labor and fighting, that's going to erode the profit margin. So today, there's no shovel in the ground. We're just buying a land. We're deciding who's making the finishing. And I thought that was a brilliant move. And now that you're saying it, what he was doing is putting a firewall down. We know each other well, right? We're all personally friends. I'm anticipating everyone having an opinion on the stuff that is the most fun to have an opinion on. But I know he's saying, because he's done this before, it's going to cost money. So what you're saying really is think ahead. Think about no matter what happens, up or down, there's going to be conflict. Figure it out now. And by the way, now is a much better time anyways, right? Because the part of your brain that you use to predict the future is a much more rational part of your brain, right? It's the frontal lobe, which is the more rational part than when you feel threatened, right? Which is the amygdala, right? Once you feel threatened, you move into a much different non-rational way of thinking. So you can almost assume that when you have an idea or an opinion that is not being listened to at the end, you're at a low rational point. And so no matter what happens, starting it makes sense.
Yeah.
It just requires a lot of time. And this is where entrepreneurs, I think, typically tend to be a little more allergic to, right? Entrepreneurs like to move quickly. They like to jump in. They don't want to spend too much time in what we say, quote unquote, lawyers, right? They don't want to think through every scenario. But this is part of this is why we're doing this, right? Part of the thinking here is it'll save you so much time later on.
Yeah, no, part of the art is understanding where that balance is going to be. I don't say to the founders, you have to go and create a bunch of agreements that are as thick as a phone book,
right,
or as a phone book used to be,
right,
and be able to nail everything down. That is not a recipe for success either. It's
right,
going to be analysis paralysis when you get into that level of detail. Understand what are the things we've learned about the biggest risks you will face. Prioritize those. Take at least the top 5 of them off your list. Along the way, by being able to grapple together with those top 5, you'll build these difficult conversation muscles. You'll be able to build a lot more of the capabilities that when we get hit by the unexpected, we are prepared better to deal with it than if we had left it for not having been able to build a bunch of those muscles. But also, you will have taken off a lot of the biggest risks off the table that you don't have to worry about anymore. And it'll free you up to be a lot more creative about the other things because you can be confident that those things are going to be taken care of.
And this goes back to our first episode on this podcast, which was really, it's an important discipline for entrepreneurs to realize that learning and data and this type of slowing down at key moments is only going to enable them to speed up later on. It's really a slow down to speed up, right?
Building a more robust foundation will enable you to be able to launch a lot better.
Yeah.
So let's get into like the second of the pieces that we were talking about with the playing with fire.
Yeah.
And you actually already teed up one of them towards the end of last episode about when you are dealing with the elephants in the room, we can't discuss these issues that are going to be the critical ones that if we don't get them out on the table and find a solution to them, that is going to cause problems for us. One of the key challenges that we face with that is even knowing what are the elephants in the room that we should be discussing. And being able to have the third party that you mentioned last time around can be a critical part of being able to help solve that. Have someone who knows the path ahead, knows the things that are typically the way in which a founding team is going to go awry, and have that person say to you, have you guys discussed this yet?
Yeah.
Put that on your radar. Have them be forcing a bunch of the dialogue. It'll make it easier, A, for you to know what things to discuss, but B, even if you knew it and you were avoiding it, that person will be able to force a bunch more of that discussion for you. And so 2 levels in which that third party is going to be able to play a role. It should be, and picking that third party is also a critical part of it. If this happens to be one of your mentors, but the other person doesn't have a relationship with that person, then that's not going to be a healthy person to be able to tap there. You need someone that each of the parties sees as an impartial arbiter between you, that when they say something, they're not going to be wondering about the underlying mission that this is going to fulfill, that is going to be for my co-founder but against me and other things like that. It has to be someone that both of you trust well, that is going to be able to bring the impartiality and the knowledge of the road ahead. And so injecting that third person in can be a key way to be able to make those difficult conversations happen.
Do you advise having chairmans, board members, like as part of the infrastructure, or is it somebody on the side? Like, are you saying the best practice here is build? I know it's not what would be a structurally official board, in many cases, but still build somebody who plays and give him a title or give her a title, right? Not just a friend or a mentor. You are now the chairman of this company. You are the vice chairman of this company. You are the board member of this company. You are the advisor. And now that person is, at least in the beginning, the sounding board. Is that what you see as best practice in the market?
Yeah, that's a way, like how formal you make it and other things like that is a key thing you have to be a little bit careful about. You go name this person chairman, and they're only going to be very good at doing it for the first 6 months, and then you're going to have to replace that person. You're stuck with them. Right. There's going to be all sorts of ways. So the formality of it is the one thing that I push back a little bit on. But other than that, having someone who is that third party, and this actually gets us into also size of founding teams considerations.
Interesting.
So if you have 2 co-founders and you're going to be diverging 1 versus 1, how are you going to be able to resolve any of that gridlock? It's going to be all sorts of tensions that are day-to-day problems. Even if you disagree on only 10% of all the things that are going on,
it's going to suck.
The number of decisions that you're going to be facing is going to be constant. Yeah. That's going to be very common that you're going to be diverging from them. And how are you going to resolve it if it's a 1-1? Yeah. And so it's a very different thing than if it's a founding team of 3. If you have 3, then you can have some kind of rules. You can adopt majority rule, other things like that. Yeah. And that's where if it's a 1+1 problem, then having that third party that you were just talking about can be a key one to be able to resolve that issue. Yeah. One of the key things to be able to do when, again, and this is getting into like the second of the things that we might want to frame. We've been talking about the relationships part. When it comes to the ways in which the team is architecting itself, what my research has shown is that there are 3 key areas that you have to really be able to get into in terms of being able to make sure that you're thinking down the road and now making a decision that's going to be a much stronger architecture than is typically done. And so the first of them, we call them the 3 R's. The first of the R's is the relationships part that we've been talking about here. What we're heading into now is the second of the R's, the roles and decision-making. Mm-hmm. How are you going to be able to allocate the roles? How are you going to be able to collectively make decisions? Other things like that. The R's are related to each other. They're distinct on their own as being important decisions, but also how you decide how to be able to do the relationships might be going and impacting the roles part of what you're doing. And team size is one of the things that might be impacting it also. And to just go and skate where the puck is going to be in terms of the full of the R's, the third of the R's after relationships and the roles and decision-making is the rewards. Intangible and tangible rewards, how you're going to be able to allocate that within the team. Those are a bunch of the things that we're going to map out along the way. But right now, we're starting to verge into where the relationships that we've been focusing on and the roles are going to be going and impacting each other.
So, yeah, and I think that's a great place to move towards. I just want to point out that a lot of entrepreneurs, I think, say, we'll figure it out or we'll work it out. I have a friend of mine who's an entrepreneur, and he said to me that he did an anecdotal study in his company. The amount of emotional energy expended on non-important, we'll say mildly important tactical disagreements. Like, I don't think entrepreneurs appreciate that. You only have a certain amount of emotional energy that you can expend on any given day, right? And if you're at loggerheads, even for 10%, and it's just a constant 10%, it's draining you from the ability to really make bigger moves or to walk in concert with somebody. So the overlooking this part of what you said, which is how do we fit the roles and how do we figure out who's making what decisions, and how entrepreneurs and business owners will say, oh, come on, like, we'll just figure it out. Maybe, and if you're batting, 90%, like you're not even in the Hall of Fame. You've created the Hall of Fame, right? Like if you're and you're still exhausted at the end of the day, and you've still missed 4 major opportunities because you're fighting over small little things, and on the way home from work, you're leaving 4 WhatsApp voice notes for 5 people. It's becoming something which really could have been somewhat avoided.
Yeah, one of the things that you're getting into is that when you're talking about tensions within the team, there's productive tensions and there's destructive tensions. And the productive tensions are going to be the ones where you're going and hashing over with each other the best strategy to have, the best way to be able to tackle various problems and coming to a better decision because of the tension. But you're also going to have a bunch of things that are more the destructive that are going to take away from that. And you have a finite amount of how much tension you can have within the team. How much can you make it productive rather than destructive tensions? Yeah. It's also where I remember bringing into class, I hadn't even thought about this analog, but it came up beautifully within a case discussion we were having in the first day of our founding team discussion within my Founder's Dilemmas course. Azer Conegdo. Being able to have the founding team of the world and what lessons can we learn from what in the beginning of Bereshit and Genesis that it talks about the relationship between them. Azer Conegdo literally means a helper against you. Seems like an oxymoron. Seems like very much a muddle of a concept. Right. Turns out to be a very sharp concept at being able to go and describe founding teams and the relationship that they could craft with each other. Uh-huh. So we think about what Azer Kenegdo means.
For those that are tuning in right now that don't know what that is, when Adam, it's the Adam and Eve relationship. God calls Eve the helper against you, the Azer Kenegdo.
Yeah, and so that's the founding team of the world. What can we learn from today's founding teams?
Exactly.
By being able to take the lessons from there. And the all-time great commentator on the Bible, Rashi, what Rashi captures is, I think, the descriptive of what our natural instinct is when we have the pushback, the kenegdo, the against us. And what Rashi says is that if we are worthy, then we get the support, the azer. If we are unworthy, then we get the kenegdo. And so when someone is pushing back against us, when we have some kind of a conflict about something, that is saying to us that there's something wrong with us, that we're not getting the support. That's what we, that it's a knock against us, and we recoil from it. We have a natural human instinct. When we get criticism, when we get the performance review, when we get, the critical mark on a paper from a teacher, that we recoil, we want to go and bury it, we want to avoid the conversation and things like that. A critical thing is our replacing that natural recoil that Rashi is talking about with something that the Netziv, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who was another one of the greats, lived a lot more recently, but what he says is that the kenegdo, the pushback, is actually the biggest blessing. The kenegdo is the azer, is the help to us. Exactly. Someone just did us the favor when they gave us a criticism, as long as it's a constructive criticism, of showing us where we are not reaching our potential, where we can do better. Everyone else was not willing to go and say those things to us. But if we can have someone who's willing to go and show us that this is something that we should be raising our sights on and being able to aspire better than what we've been doing, that is the greatest blessing. We should be saying thank you for it. And that's what, within founding teams, when we go and develop this relationship, the conflict relationship, we have to see our job is being able to help each other, being able to be the kenegdo, the against us, in the right way, not in the destructive way, but in the constructive piece of it. And if we can go and take that founding team of the world relationship and learn how to fight well, learn how to be able to make it a lot more productive than founding teams typically do, that's where we'll be a lot stronger for having gone through this journey together.
So maybe we should put this on the bench, but one of the things that I think we should talk about in future episodes is really delve into this idea of constructive versus destructive tension. And even this idea of how to create that world, right? How do you create, and maybe it'll emerge from, the next few episodes naturally, but I've seen teams in which they really are building each other up. They're beating each other up, but they're building each other up. And it's obvious that the conflict and the fighting is really a healthy exercise of getting to truth. And I've seen teams where it's disastrous. It is a complete fight for territory, and they're hiding behind purpose when it's really about power. And so the tension really is destructive. It's undermining. It's back channeling. And I just think, I'm sure it will emerge if you build this right. And for those, again, that are listening that already have a full-fledged company, it's valuable to sort of see it from the beginning, to see how to, build it right, even if the train's going. But I think we should sort of put on our list to talk about really the strategy to how to make sure that you're building something that when someone is this, pro or con force, it's really for the ultimate purpose of greatness and not for selfish needs.
Okay, absolutely. That's going to be a recurring theme that we're going to see throughout about there's going to be control tendencies that a founder is going to have that are not going to be productive for the venture. How can that founder get the self-awareness of realizing when that's going to be a minus? What are the other ways in which that's going to harm being able to attract the right people into the venture to fill your holes? And so that's also going to be another one of the recurring themes and the tensions that we can talk about.
It makes me feel for sure that as I'm hearing you talk it through, and maybe you see this in the research, are you finding in your research that successful teams had third-party-ish people around them? Like, is the role of the angel, VC, board member, whoever, is that what they're doing for these companies? Are there hundreds of hours of Bill Gates fighting with his team and someone coming, or Zuckerberg, all the people that we know about, the Elon Musks are there in these successful companies, and there are hundreds more that we don't know about, right? Are you seeing a pattern of where the rule is that because it's so complex And because there's a need for so much self-awareness, that successful companies are employing some measure of adults in the room to ensure that there's always the voice of reason being put in.
So there's definitely much room for adults in the room. The problem is that some of those types that you were just talking about come with their own baggage with them. They're going to have their own agenda.
Sure.
They're going to have their own incentives that are going to diverge from the founders.
Sure.
The elusive thing is to find the adult in the room who is going to be able to really be aligned with the founders, who's not going to have their own self-interest, who's going to be able to have a lot more of the productive, objective approach that they're going to be able to bring to it. And that's some of the things that we can get into later on in the venture about where each of those types of parties and the divergence in their interests, how that comes and leads to a whole bunch more of these tensions that we're going to have to resolve. Taking a look at some of the takeaways from today. When you engage with friends and family, you think that's going to be a glorious founding team. Appreciate the fact that you're taking stark risks and that you're going to be playing with fire. When you play with fire, make sure to proactively create firewalls that will protect you from those risks, including some of the ones that we looked at today. One major risk is avoiding difficult conversations about the challenges you'll face. For instance, if one of you is not keeping up with the demands of the startup's growth or of your role in it, you're going to avoid, if it's someone who's close to you, having a bunch of those difficult discussions about those challenges. And you're going to have to hopefully either build your difficult conversation muscles together or involve an educated third party who can force you to tackle the difficult conversations. Another major risk is the damage to your personal relationship if things go sour in the startup. Create a disaster plan together that defines what will happen when you are fighting with each other over 1-1 gridlock and the other things that we're going to be talking about next time with the roles and decision making. Have ways in which you're acknowledging some of the pitfalls and planning around it. Far easier to do that planning when things are calm than when disaster hits.
On the next episode, we're going to be going right into the second R, right? We'll talk about roles and responsibilities and how critical that is, right? If you have the right team, but you don't have the right roles and responsibilities, you're setting them up for failure, right? Ambiguity, I think, is a major bias and leads to a lot of failure. And I think we'll jump right into that. So thanks so much for tuning in, and we can't wait to see you next time.